the best way that you are going to monetize your podcast is to position yourself as an expert and authority, a coach, a leader, and coaching people one-on-one. If you are a female Christian entrepreneur or life coach, you need a podcast. And if you have a podcast, you need a podcast coach. Finding a supportive and empowering community is key to podcaster success. Through my holistic approach as a trained life coach and my experience in the podcast industry since 2016, I want to encourage you weekly through answering your podcasting questions. I'm cheering for you, and your voice matters. Well, hello there. Happy podcasting. You are going to be in for a treat. Today we are talking about all of those podcast questions that you have been asking, and we are going to talk about amazing new findings and some podcast statistics. We're going to be talking about a huge announcement for holistic podcasting, but I'm going to save that to the end. So you're going to have to stay tuned for that. But first, I want to give you a little announcement of something that is coming up. So if you have been listening to this podcast, you've been perusing, you've been listening to all the things, and you still have not yet pressed record or launched that podcast, I have a webinar for you December 28th at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and we are going to be talking about how to start a podcast. I'm going to go through 10 steps to get there, and at the end, no surprises, I am going to invite you into our January cohort. We are starting our January podcast bootcamp from idea to launch. It's our 8-week program where we take you through actionable steps. We walk you through mindset breakthroughs. We walk you through podcast coaching. We walk you through content strategy, getting clarity on your message. We talk about tech. We talk about equipment. We talk about how to set it up on your hosting platform. We talk about how to launch successfully and actually get you to episode 1. And I love, love, love what our podcasters who just went through this in the fall, one of them said at the very end, Kristin, I wish I knew that not only would you help me create my podcast, but you actually helped me realize I am a podcaster. And I love that. And I want that for you. So if that intrigues you, then check out the link below. Number 1, sign up for our webinar. If you know you're a go and you are ready to say yes to your podcast, then go ahead and save your spot. You guys, we only have 10 spots available for this January bootcamp. So I want you to snag your spot today. All right, now let's jump into answering your podcasting questions. Number 1, I'm on Anchor, which was bought out by Spotify. Is that fine to start with? Now, here is my answer. If you have started on Spotify, specifically Spotify for podcasters, I want you to double check before you do anything that you have an RSS feed. You need an RSS feed. That is what a podcast is. And that is what is going to help your podcast get out into all of the destination apps. Otherwise, you do not have a podcast. You have audio on Spotify and Spotify only. So let's get that fixed. Make sure you have an RSS feed. I know there's a lot of people that just start and they don't even know that they have an RSS feed, or even if Spotify provided one. So make sure that you're going over and asking, what is my RSS feed? Because that's how you're going to be able to continue to send your updated episodes onto all of the podcasting apps. So here's the thing. If you have put in the work to set up your podcast equipment, you've got a message, you started recording, and you are just putting it on Spotify, you are doing yourself a disservice. You have access to all of these podcast apps, these destinations where you can reach more people. And it will do you a disservice if you do not set that up. So that's how I'm going to answer that question. Yes, you can absolutely go through Spotify. However, I genuinely think the number one hosting platform is still Libsyn, in my opinion. Yes, I get an affiliate link, but it's purely because I recommend it all the time. I was like, you know what? I might as well just have an affiliate link to Libsyn because I'm not going to recommend any other hosting platform. Now, a hosting platform is where you need to house all of your audio, and that will send all of your audio, like I said, to all of those destinations. And Libsyn does an excellent job of that, and it provides you with, I think it's up to like 20 now, 15 or 20 destinations that you can automatically add as you set up your podcast on Libsyn. So that's libsyn.com, and I will post that affiliate link down below. So thanks for that question. I love it. I love it. I love it. And guys, if you have any podcasting questions, send me an email, Kristin@KristinFieldsChadwick.com. I would love to answer your specific questions here on the show. All right, here is my second question. Kristin, how many downloads should I have to start monetizing my podcast? And this person asked two questions, so I'm going to answer that one first. To start monetizing your podcast, you can start now. Even if your audience is very small, it may not be in the way that you are thinking of monetization. And I want to clarify that. If you're looking to monetize your podcast through advertisement, through sponsors, that is going to be a higher number. However, I still firmly believe, and I know a bunch of my other podcasting buddies who are coaches out there for podcasters say the same thing. The best way that you are going to monetize your podcast is to position yourself as an expert and authority, a coach, a leader, and coaching people one-on-one or a course. Promoting your own thing is going to do way better at this point in the game. And most people that are starting a podcast that are listening to this, they are in this realm where you are more of an indie podcaster. And so I really encourage you, what are some things that you can coach somebody, consult somebody, lead people through, have a product, something that is going to help you monetize your podcast. And I just did a whole series in the fall where we talked about podcast monetization, and I gave you many ideas. We talked about creating an online summit. We talked about membership. We talked about a mini course. We talked about online courses. We've talked about paid media strategy. So all of those things, go listen back in the fall 2023, and you're going to hear so many podcasts on podcast monetization. The second question here is it absolutely necessary to have a podcast microphone? The short answer, no, it's not necessary, but I would challenge this with, do you want to sound professional and like you're taking this seriously? Right now, there's about 400,000 active podcasts right now, like meaning they've produced a show, they've published a show in the last few weeks, and it is active. That's not a lot, but it is also a lot. You have to distinguish yourself. And at this point in the game, as people are getting more used to podcasts and they have all of these choices out there, you want to stand out. You want to present yourself well. You are making an impression. And if you take away all of the other senses, if you're purely a podcast host and you are using just audio, you want to make sure that it sounds well. It sounds good in their ears. You are taking away all their other senses. They can't see you unless they're watching via YouTube, which that's a whole different conversation. They cannot interact with you in real life. And so you want to make sure that your quality is matching your passion to spread your message well and with excellence. So that's the answer to my question. Is it absolutely necessary? No, but yes. If you want this to matter, treat it better than a hobby, right? If you're a coach and you want to come across as professional, as you are taking your job seriously, do the work. Find a great dynamic mic. I always recommend Shure MV7. I love Samsung Q2U. although those might be out of stock as of now. But those are my two favorite microphones. I have the Samsung and I have the Shure mic. So there's that. All right, man, we are flying through these questions. All right, last question from someone was, what is podcast management and how does it work? I love this question. Okay, so podcast management is basically having a team that helps you just record your show and then you hand it off. That is what we do. In our podcast management, we here at Holistic Podcasting, we offer different levels of management. So we have a basic level of management where we edit your show and we publish your show. Our second level, it's called mid-level. We help you edit. So like you record it, you send it to us, we edit it, we write the show notes, and then we publish it onto your hosting platform like Libsyn. And then you also, in specifically our podcast management, you get included into our podcast membership, which is basically a monthly training and coaching opportunity for you. Then our top tier, which is our gold getter, and that is the YouTube shorts and YouTube and audio combined. So all three of those are podcast management. So basically somebody is managing the editing and the publishing and the promotion of your podcast. So that's what podcast management is. So the next question would be, how do you know if you need a podcast manager? And that becomes very clear when you are ready financially and emotionally ready to part ways with the extra energy it takes to put a podcast out there. If you enjoy the podcasting process of editing, of writing your show notes, of publishing it, then keep doing it. If that is not your jam, then I highly encourage you to find a podcast manager like our own, which I will say our podcast management team is one of the best trio of women that you could possibly find that are going to support you in a way that you are not just another podcaster. We build podcasters. We don't build podcasts. Does that make sense? Like we are championing you to use your voice, and we not only edit and publish and write show notes and promote you, we are championing you as a person to succeed. And I am confident that we can help serve you and get your message out there well. If not us, find somebody who can edit and promote your podcast with excellence. And okay, I think we're going to stop there because I get really passionate about the podcast management. I really, truly think if you are a coach, a speaker, a leader in your field and expertise, your job is to protect that energy in doing what God has called you to do. If editing and writing those show notes is something that just takes a toll on you and it takes away from the actual purpose that you're called to do, it is worth the investment to find a producer, a podcast manager, and somebody to help you with all of the nitty-gritty things that you do not thrive off of doing. Alrighty, let's talk stats. You guys know I kind of nerd out on podcasting stats. So whenever there's a new study that comes out, I'm all in. So today's podcast stats, as we round out 2023, I'm so excited to get Podcast Marketing Trends 2023. I'm going to put that link down below. So if you wanted to take a little gander at it, I encourage you to do so because it is fascinating to see what some of those trends are. And I'm going to share those with you right now. So they interviewed over 500 different podcasters who are either they are the creator of a podcast, they are a podcast production company, freelance podcast professional, or somehow in the network or media company. So of those people, 27%, the purpose of having a podcast was to build an audience, and 27%, so same number, was to grow personal brand and authority. You guys, I've talked about this a lot. When we are starting a podcast, one of the things that we are doing is building our authority, our expertise. We are gaining that know, like, and trust factor. And this right here shows you why people start a podcast on those two answers alone. Now, most of those respondents for this particular study who are generating an income as at least part of the reason why they are producing their shows, most of them are coaches and consultants. And I've said this many, many times on here. If you don't have a podcast and you are a coach, you are missing an opportunity to build on top of your already amazing coaching business, because people want to know how you coach. Coaching, consulting, and podcasting are like, oh man, I need like beans and rice. They go together, right? They complement each other, and it's only going to help you market and grow your audience even wider than what you currently are doing. That was one finding that I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Another finding was as your podcast experience grows, the more downloads per episode you will receive. So, for instance, there was a specific question around how many years have you been podcasting and how many downloads per episode. And they found a direct correlation with how long they podcasted with how many episodes per episode were downloaded. So if you were just starting, I want to speak patience over you. It takes time to master and cultivate and build your audience. In this survey, in this trend, they are seeing that if you have about 3 years of experience, the average downloads per episode is less than 1,000. If you have 4 years or more of experience, it is between 1,000 and 10,000. If you have 7 years of experience, not many people have had 7 years of experience in podcasting, but they have 10,000 or more downloads per episode. So most of you that are listening who have gone through my podcast bootcamp launch, or you have participated in my podcast membership, I want you to hear that. It takes time to build up your podcast, time and consistency. Another fascinating thing through this study was the trends and downloads over the year. Now, if you've listened to me, whether it's been through podcast coaching or through the bootcamp or on this podcast, I've talked about how summertime can have a big dip in your numbers. But what's interesting is they actually showed a steady download numbers during summer and a huge dip in September and October. And their suspicion is that people have so much going on during September with the back to school and returning from the summer break that podcasting and podcasts get pushed down on the priority list. So I thought that was a really, really interesting, fun fact there, because sometimes we can sell ourselves short and not put out episodes during the summer. And I want you to rethink that. If you're needing a break or you need to batch record, I would batch record or schedule that seasonal pause in September and October and come back at the end of October, because that's where it shows the downloads start to tick back up in November and December, and they explode in January. And that is pretty consistent over time in the last, years of watching podcast trends. January seems to just take off over and over and over again. So if you're going to launch a show, January, February, high months of listenership. So definitely one of the best times to launch a podcast. Not saying that you can't launch a podcast in March, April, or October, but I would consider, if you are doing 2024 vision and dreaming and podcasting is on your list, if you haven't started one, really be intentional about when you are launching that podcast. Okay. The median month-to-month growth in a podcast is about 1.62%. So a typical download per show growth is about, like if you're in the 500 downloads per month, then you get about 10 new downloads per month, which is interesting. It's just slow and steady. Over a whole year, your growth rate is about 21% on average. So if you are, let's see, less than 1,000 downloads per episode, your growth rate will be about 27% on average per year. So if you've been frustrated with the growth of your show, it's not just you. There is, I think, just grit that's going to have to happen for us podcasters. Staying the course, staying consistent. It's like working out. You make a choice. Some days you're motivated and some days you're not. You just stay the course and you stay consistent. Okay, now, one of the key takeaways at the end of the stats that I wanted to share is that for those of us that have less than 1,000 downloads per episode, they are most likely to grow by any amount as well as double their audience, which totally makes sense. It's much easier for a show with 100 unique listeners to find 100 more than it is for a show with 100,000 unique listeners to find 100,000 more. So even though we're small, we can grow exponentially. So don't give up. There is hope, friends. There is hope. All right. So the average consumption rate. Now, consumption rate is how far do people listen into your episode. We've talked about this a couple times inside of our membership, and our average consumption rate from our listener, if you are less than 1,000 downloads per episode, is 63%. 63% people make it through your whole episode. So interesting to think about. And again, going into your podcast.connect for your Apple Analytics, it shows you your consumption rate of your listener. So it's interesting just to compare it to the national, or well, at least from this sample size of 500 podcasters, what it compares to yours. So if you're higher than that, way to go. I know if you're at around 80-ish%, that means that usually they have listened to your entire show. They just skip the intro and the outro. So well done. I just want to give mad props to that. If you're lower than 60%, it might be time to think, okay, should I cut down my episodes to a shorter time frame? And there's nothing wrong with that. Doesn't mean that you're like your identity, like there's shame in that at all. It's just cutting it down to meaningful content. Okay, now this is one of the most asked questions that I get typically from people is, Kristin, how many episodes should I put out there over the month? And what is interesting is that the average median days in between episodes that came up on this trend is 7 days. That is the median days from podcasts that are ginormous to the indie podcasts. So I thought, wow, that's really interesting. The higher the downloads per episode show, meaning they have a higher download per month, the more that they produce. So that average was 5.6 days. So they might be doing more twice a week, but I would say the average is once a week. So interesting to think about right there. Another question that I get asked almost on the similar vein is, how long should my episode be? Now, this gets answered in the question of, first and foremost, how long does it take you to present an answer, solve a problem, share a solution effectively? If you're talking about and filling time just for the sake of time, then we need to rethink it. But I will tell you that the average podcast that is 10,000, or actually let me share this stat, because I would guarantee most people listening to this episode, we are in that 1,000 to 10,000 per episode, or even less than that. And the average episode length is around 37 to 35 minutes. So that's interesting to think about. And do you need to fill up your time with even more engaging stories and content? Something to think about. The average number of episodes published in the downloads per episode of less than 1,000 is about 52 episodes published. Again, that's about once a week, and it kind of matches up with that same statistic that I mentioned earlier. Okay, I'm going to end it here because I don't want to bore you with all of the stats, and I really love nerding out on this kind of stuff. But I will tell you that one of the top marketing channels to promote and grow your podcast is social media by far. Close second is going to be podcast guesting, and that goes for all shows. Whether you have gained a lot of growth this past year or you have gained 20% to 80, 100%, all of these are avenues of how they best grew their show. Social media, podcast guesting, newsletter, YouTube. Social media was the top way to market their podcast. The second, with a closely behind, was podcast guesting. So my friend, if you are a podcaster and you want to grow your show, you need to be getting on other people's podcasts. It is time to sign up for Podmatch, which is a great guest matching service with other podcasters who are like-minded, and you can vet out whose podcast you want to be on, or if you want them to be on your show. Yes. And then the third is newsletter. YouTube is growing. I will say from other data that I've seen is that through YouTube is a great way to be discovered. However, it doesn't convert organically over into the podcast app. So yes, there is growth in YouTube, and it's not your top pick. Actually, social media is. So social media, podcast guesting, and then newsletter, and then YouTube. Now, of the social media, Instagram is one of the highest social channels that people use for growth. And then there's Facebook. And third is Twitter, shockingly. So, or formerly known as X. That's currently known as X. Alrighty, now to round it all up. Overall, podcast growth is slow, but it's right on schedule. It is just slow and steady. Continue to be patient, be consistent, put your content out there, make sure it brings value, make sure you're bringing tools for your listeners to engage with you, connect with you. And again, how to grow your podcast, that is the number one question for podcasters, and social media is one of the top resources where we can grow and market our podcasts. The most effective overall, by far, by a lot, is social media. And then it's podcast guesting. All right. I hope you enjoyed all of that stats and nerding out. And it's really insightful as you move forward into 2024 of how you are going to move forward. What are those things that you're going to concentrate on? Maybe you sat through that and you listened and you're like, gosh, well, okay, I do promote on social media, but I'm not really a guest on podcast. So how are you going to implement that? All right. So there's that. Now, I told you that I was going to give you an announcement about holistic podcasting, and here it is. So we are going to be doing a rebrand in January 2024. So I wanted to give you a heads up that it may not be called holistic podcasting anymore. It will not. And you don't have to do a thing. You do not need to subscribe to anything. If you are already following me on your podcast app, you do not have to do anything. You will still get notifications every time I put out a new episode, and you're not going to want to miss this new rebrand. You guys, I am a podcast coach and I am learning too. Every year I'm reevaluating, I'm tweaking, I'm rebranding, I am trying to serve the audience that God has put before me well. And so that is why I am rebranding. I am excited about this move, and I will keep you posted as we move closer to the end of the year. But I just wanted to give you a heads up to notice that there might be a little name change coming in January, and still the same old me, still the same old topics and new topics. And I'm so excited about all of the guests that are going to be on the show in 2024. It is fire, you guys, fire, fire, fire. So if you have a friend who is starting a podcast, or they are in the throes of growing their podcast in this patient process, send them my way. Send them a show that you have found valuable, an episode that has helped you along this journey. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Find me on social media at Kristin Fields Chadwick, or just send me a message here. All right, take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Holistic Podcasting. Hey, if you enjoyed the show, leave a review and tell me why you loved this particular episode. I would love to hear from you, friend. And as always, happy podcasting.